Hello, and welcome to episode 45 of TBR, the To Be Read podcast, where we talk about the books we love and the topics that interest us. I'm Patrick Stemp, and with me tonight is Jamie Maltman. How you doing, Jamie?
Great, yourself?
Good. Michael is not able to join us tonight. He's got some illnesses going on in the family, and he needed to deal with that. But we do have a guest tonight. We have Libbie Hawker joining us. How are you, Libbie?
Great. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And tonight we're going to be talking about historical fiction, which is, well, up both of your wheelhouses. You'll may have to educate me a little bit.
Yay!
So thanks for coming. And before we get started, we'd like to give our guests an opportunity to sort of talk a little bit about the kinds of things they like to read.
Sure. Well, I obviously have been a big reader for my entire life. Ever since I was a really little kid, I like to dig into big novels instead of kind of typical kid-sized books. And historical fiction was one of my earliest interests ever since I was, oh gosh, very young. I would get into those books pretty deeply because I just loved exploring, I guess, probably what drew me to historical fiction so strongly was the exploration of worlds that were still our world, but totally exotic at the same time. So that's what initially really drew me to it, and I really got especially interested in ancient historical fiction and would read anything I could get my hands on. I know, right? It's the best. I would read anything I could get my hands on that had anything to do with before medieval times, whether it was biblical fiction or non-biblical or for young adults and kids or for adults, whatever it was. If it had some kind of ancient culture involved, I was on it. So that's me in a nutshell as a reader.
Cool. And so with the historical fiction, do you tend to stick to sort of more of the like straight up historical fiction, or do you also read the pyramids with dragons?
I'll do pretty much anything that has a historical edge to it. So yeah, I get really into even stuff that's way more in the fantasy genre, but that has kind of a historical flavor to it, like Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire. Really into that because it feels like European history.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and anything if it has a touch of history, I'm there.
Okay.
Awesome.
Cool. So we'll do our round table for the week before we get to our topic, and we'll lead off with Jamie. How's your weekend reading been?
It's been really good, actually. Got through a bunch of different things. On the reading with my son's side, I'll go really quickly. We read Amulet Volume 6, so continuing that graphic novel. So that one's Escape from Lucian by Kazu Kibuishi, and still really enjoying the artwork, the story, everything. And now we've got to wait until early next year for Volume 7 to come out, so we've caught up to what's been published. We were also reading that M is for Magic, Neil Gaiman short story compilation, which is actually, it's funny, I didn't realize until the end that it's all work that's appeared in different places, but he just brought together the ones that would be sort of middle grade or YA sort of one. So I didn't finish reading it to my son, but I did finish reading it myself and figured out that I'd actually read some of the other short stories, so finished it even faster than I thought I would. Had a really fun one called Chivalry about a little old lady that finds the Holy Grail at basically like the equivalent of a Value Village, like an Oxfam store. That one's really cool. I like that idea, and I made my wife read that before we took it back to the library today. And then I also read Neil Gaiman's middle grade Odd and the Frost Giants. I read about a third of that to my son, and then had to take it back today, so I blitz read that out in the sun, 20 degrees or so Celsius here today, so beautiful. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe not quite that much, but at least nice that I can sit outside and read, which after the winter is a very good thing. And that one's like a Norse mythology, like kid getting involved, having to help out the Norse gods from some trouble, sort of a Neil Gaiman story, which was really good too. Started reading a new nonfiction one. That's the one that I have on the kitchen table now. That's The History of the Book in 100 Books, The Complete Story from Egypt to Ebook by Roderick Cave, and I'm not seeing the name of the co-author there, but it's a huge coffee table book type one, and that's pretty neat, and I just started that. Finished, finally, As the Crow Flies, the fantasy novel I've been talking about for a few weeks before taking my detour for Hannibal Lecter last week. And so that one, really enjoyed it. So that's by Robin Lithgow, an author that I actually know a little bit through the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Network. And it's the protagonist is an opinionated and sarcastic thief who gets into, like, there's a really good, like, it's a really interesting sort of action sort of getting into trouble sequence at the beginning on what he's stealing, and it just goes from there and puts people into trouble, and then he's got to become a reluctant hero and gets forced to be with a kind of motley crew of, well, a person who really doesn't like him and has been hunting him for a while as his main companion, and then picks up some other weird companions along the way. So just a really fun story. I enjoyed it very much. It was her first novel, and really well done. So again, As the Crow Flies. And I just started reading, I think over the weekend, a book called The Sekhmet Bed by L.M. Ironside.
That sounds familiar.
Someone I think Libbie knows pretty well.
I've had a few arguments with her.
Yeah. So that's straight up historical fiction, as historical as it can be, going back into fair ways back into Egyptian dynastic history. But it's the story of Ahmose, or Ahmose, I guess you'd say it, right?
Yeah, that was good. That was very good.
I've been to Egypt, so going into the Temple of Karnak at like dawn as the first tour group going in a tour group of 4 is one of the coolest things I've done in my life. So
I bet that's awesome.
that was very much awesome, and it was with my wife and her brother and one other person and her guide. So I'm just getting started on that, but enjoying the story so far. It's funny. It reminds me a little bit, just at the very initial setup of Brandon Sanderson's Warbreakers.
Oh, okay.
Just in that there's 2 sisters and like a strategic marriage sort of a situation, and it doesn't go exactly how they're expecting at the beginning. So just that initial setup. Then it's going to go in a completely different way, obviously. But no, I'm enjoying the story so far. I think the characters are cool. The very detailed Egyptology is very cool, and I appreciate that stuff a lot. So looking forward to continue to read the book. And it's one that I've actually had on my list to read for a while, ever since I picked it up, either when you had it on sale or when it was some free days, or maybe it's always free. I'm not sure.
It's always free now, but I do a lot of like promos with it and stuff,
Yeah.
so it floats out there around once in a while. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you're liking it. I'm always pleasantly surprised when guys say they enjoy it, because it is a little bit of a girly book, I would think. But you know,
it's enough Egypt stuff. So.
Yeah.
And I guess just she's the princess or daughter of the pharaoh, and then the pharaoh dies, and then all sorts of crazy stuff's going to happen. So that's sort of the initial setup. But I'll talk more about it next week when I finish.
Cool. Okay.
And that's your week?
That's my busy week.
Okay. And Libbie, how about you? Have you gotten any reading done recently?
Yes, thank goodness. And I haven't been reading a lot of fiction for the last several months. I've been doing a lot of research reading for upcoming books that I'm going to be writing. So just this past week, I finally got to get back into some fiction that I've sort of had to put aside, sadly and with regret. So I have been enjoying that very much. So I've got my Kindle here. You guys can't see because the video is not working on my end, but I pulled out my trusty old Kindle to like take a look back at what I've been going through for the last few days. So definitely one I've been enjoying very, very much is a little novella called The Three Fates by Kate Quinn. And this was a freebie she put out recently. She had the most recent book, which I think might be the last one in her Mistress of Rome series, which is all set in ancient Rome from like Domitian up through just after Domitian's rule, which is some pretty interesting stuff in terms of historical events. It's, I believe, 4 books, maybe 5 now with a novella, so it all follows this like a family of characters as they sort of go through this political tangle that spans a couple of generations. It's really, really good. I love Kate Quinn's writing. I totally love it. It's like exactly the right combination for me of like really fun beach read that you just can't look away from, and really, really excellent attention to historical detail. And also her writing's just gorgeous in some spots too. So I'm a little bit jealous of her as a writer. So she's great. So The Three Fates is the novella I've been enjoying, and then as soon as I'm done with that, I'm going to jump into her new book, which I think is called, if I get this right, Lady of the Eternal City. Yes, I think that's right. I've been enjoying a really, really fun young adult book, a novella also, called Born to Run. It's by an author named Anne Hunter. This is straight up just like transporting me back to 7th and 8th grade when I was a horse crazy girl. I'm still a horse crazy girl, just to clarify that. But this is just like the greatest, most over-the-top melodramatic soap opera set on the backs of thoroughbred racehorses. So it's really, really, really fun. Just like a riot to read. It's so cool. I have also been reading, where'd it go? Come back. Helen of Sparta by Amalia Carosella. That's a really, really cool book. I picked it up because it was on like a Kindle First deal. So I got it for freebie because I've got the Prime. And I'm not really sure what to expect. I was just like, Helen of Sparta, that's an interesting title because it's normally Helen of Troy. Greek history is not my biggest forte. I mean, I sort of know the basics, but I wasn't like, oh yes, of course, Helen of Sparta. So just started reading it and have really been enjoying it so far. I think her writing style is really gorgeous, and I really like the fact that she's sort of giving a different take on Helen from legend, who really only got a place in history as like this sort of bad girl who caused this huge war and everyone was fighting over her and oh for shame. And she really gets kind of her own voice in this book, so that's been very enjoyable. So Helen of Sparta, Amalia Carosella. And I have been rereading Wolf Hall because it's the greatest book ever written.
Have you watched the show at all, or because I just started hearing reference to the show, and then the name keeps popping up, and I haven't read it, but I know it's well regarded.
Yeah, I did. I watched the entire show because maybe a friend secretly gave it to me on a USB drive, and when all the episodes have been released in the US, I'm going to buy it so I can watch it constantly. I really liked the show a lot. It doesn't capture the book in the same way. I don't think it's possible to capture Hilary Mantel's prose even with the best filmmaking ever, and the filmmaking is very, very good in the TV show. But it's not the same experience as reading the book, but it's still very enjoyable. So I would 100% recommend the book over the show, but if you're not the type of person who wants to read, 300 pages of Hilary Mantel, then definitely watch the BBC and PBS series.
Cool.
Okay. So that was your reading for the week?
That was my week, yep.
Sounds like you're busy.
Yep.
So on to me then. The only book that I actually started and finished this week was Take Off Your Pants by Libbie Hawker. And I really enjoyed it very much. I know that's a book that's being talked about a lot right now, I think, kind of in our little circles. And, I've actually kind of been in a place lately where I'm not really looking for more like books on craft. That's like I gotta stop reading books on craft and start writing, right? Or do more of that. And but I have to say, like, it was very interesting, and I definitely want to use the things that I learned through reading it in sort of plotting out a novel and see how it works. It's a good little book, to read it in a day, and I definitely want to try it out. I think Michael has definitely read it, and you, Jamie, you've read it as well, right?
No, I read your other book, the
Gotta Read It?
Yeah, recently.
Right.
Cool, okay.
Yeah, so I enjoyed that a lot.
Great, I'm glad you liked it. I've been really pleasantly surprised, but very emphasis on surprised at how many people have really gotten into that book and have sent me emails about it and stuff, and like talking about it all over forums and everything. It's a little surprising to me to have my book be sort of at the epicenter of so much discussion among writers, but I'm really glad people have found it so useful. It makes me really happy that I could have shared something useful with everyone else.
I kind of wanted to check out the other book. Was the author's name Trudy, the last name?
Trudy. Yeah, John Truby. Yeah, it's a great book.
And but unfortunately it's one of those ones I think that's been around for a while, and the ebook is like crazy expensive. I mean, not like $30 or anything, but
unreasonably expensive. Is what you're saying.
Yes, but yeah, I mean it's good because I've read there's the Snowflake model, and you've got the hero's journey and Dan Wells and his 7 steps, and we've talked about a lot of these before. And I just read Dwight V. Swain's Techniques of the Selling Writer, which was also really good.
Yeah.
And a lot of them kind of hit the same path, right? 3 acts or these points, and I just think you had a really good way of just kind of breaking it down. So I'm definitely gonna spend some more time with that book.
Great, thanks. I appreciate that.
And then, so the other reading, I'm kind of been in sort of a rereading mode lately, and also picking. So I've been reading yours, Isaac Asimov, which is just a series of letters to and from Asimov over the years. He was a very prolific, not just writer of books, but also of letters and postcards and things like that. So this is a book that his brother put together after he passed away, and it's very interesting. And through reading that, I realized that one of Isaac Asimov's, I guess not one of, but his all-time favorite writer, I think, was P.G. Wodehouse.
Oh, okay,
Who wrote
wow.
and the Jeeves stories have kind of been on my TBR list for years, since before e-reading was a thing, and just never got around to them. And a couple months ago I picked up one of the first omnibus, and so I cracked that open this week and started giving it a read as well. I mean, the letter he wrote to P.G. Wodehouse, he was just he was gushing, saying, I just have to tell you that I've read at least 50 of your books at least 50 times each, so I don't know how he had time to read anything else while he was doing all that writing. But
Isaac Asimov fanboy.
yeah. I also
Awesome.
started doing a reread of The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut, one of my all-time favorites. And I've also started rereading a book by Steve White called The Prometheus Project.
That sounds familiar. What's that about?
It's about so there are many galactic, races and civilizations out there, and Earth is basically pulling a con on these races to make ourselves look more advanced than we really are. And there's because we wanted to be brought into the fold and given at least some sort of diplomatic rights, and not just treated as this scummy little world that nobody cared about. So they're pulling one over on the universe, at the same time pulling one over on the inhabitants of Earth by not letting anybody here know that there are all these alien races out there. And so I'm enjoying that reread, but I have to say that book, I got the ebook version, is a fantastic example of how a traditional publisher can put something out that is just horribly, terribly edited. Spelling errors. I mean, there's the name of one of the races. It was a race or a place, I can't remember which. Where it appears like 3 times on the page and it's different each time. Kind of like the. And there's weird character, like they didn't format the book properly, so
It's it's a really bad OCR.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
The word cliche was in there at some point, but it was spelled C-L-I-C-H, weird uppercase K, right? And there's a strange little 0 or an O at the end of each chapter. Just kind of like 3 or 4 lines, and it's just terrible. So I don't know, maybe it's one of the first ebooks they formatted or something, but good book. But you can put up with a little bit of that stuff, but at some point it just starts to take over the story almost, where you're looking for the next spelling error or whatever. Yeah. But anyway, that's been my reading for the week. I'm in this kind of weird position that we get into sometimes, where I've got lots on the go, but nothing's getting finished, except for Take Off Your Pants. So.
Well, I'm honored.
Well, I got into it and just read through it yesterday. Just kind of banged through it in a day.
Yeah, it's short, so at least you can go through it pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those books that you do a read through and then go back through and actually start following the steps, right? You want to read it through once and kind of get a sense of the entire architecture of it, and then go through it again and actually try to put it into practice. Yeah.
Yeah, probably smart.
So with that, we can move on to our topic and talk about some historical fiction.
Yay!
So what are you guys is going to have to go first? Or all I'll be talking about is Jack White and my Skystone.
You lead it off, Jamie.
Have you read that, Libbie? The Jack White's version of Camelot?
I have not yet, but that's totally on my TBR list because I've heard it's very interesting. So
yeah, like we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Just as in the downside of it, the upside of it is the first few books are great, and he just takes that was one where it's sort of conjectural, trying to make a historical explanation for the Arthurian mythos, basically.
The Lady of the Lake idea, that part of the mythology, is the part that stood out for me as the most interesting as to where that where he thinks that could have come from.
Stuff like the name Excalibur, and then taking it to the Excalib Arabic for the the method used to make the sword kind of stuff. So he tries to make a sort of scientific historical explanation for everything.
How Merlin,
including his Merlin and stuff like that. So it's just it was a neat take on something that's not usually that's not historical fiction per se. It's sort of
and then if you haven't, and then his other, I think probably more accurately historically based would be his William Wallace series, which starts with the Forest Laird, and the titles of the second and third book elude me, but
and then he's got another Templar related one too, I think.
Yep.
So.
Was Jack White the guy who wrote a book called Taliesin, like way back in the day? Because I read this book back in, I don't know, 9th grade, 10th grade, so like it would have been 1995, 96, and I really liked it, but I cannot find the book again. Like, I don't know who wrote it. I know it was a male author. I'm like 99% sure of that. I can't find it, and I really want to reread it. So if anybody out there knows.
Is part of the, like, are you not sure how to spell the title, or?
No, I know how to spell it. It's like the dude from mythology. It sounds, maybe it might have been Jack White if he was writing back then, because it sounds like it would be the type of thing that's sort of up his alley, where he tries to sort of concoct like an accurate historical reason behind this mythology. So this one sort of ties in some Celtic mythologies like Taliesin, the hero, in with Merlin, for example, and also ties it to Atlantis. So the whole series opens, I remember, with like Santorini or something exploding and destroying Atlantis, and a few people escaping and like making their way to Britain, and they sort of become these mythic sort of kind of hero guys. It was really good, and I would love to reread it, but I can't find the book, which is a weird thing to say in the internet age.
Yeah, if
you usually find everything with Google. So if anybody out there knows, drop me a line, let me know.
You do see that sometimes on the boards where like, oh, I'm trying to remember this book. It was about a guy who did that thing.
Yeah.
And it's in space.
It's amazing how often they'll help you find it too.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody knows. So.
Oh, have you guys ever happened to chance across those threads on Smart Bitches Trashy Books, the romance blog, where somebody will come in with the most vague thing ever? Like the one I saw, I kid you not, had a plot point that hinged on like the guy finding like a hair from the woman's head on her pillow and tracking her down that way, and people instantly, like within minutes, knew what book she was talking about. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. So I need someone like that to help me track down this old book.
If it is, I don't think it's by Jack White, the one you're mentioning, because it's not showing up in his Goodreads list, but that's not necessarily meaningful. Oh wait, no, I'm only on page 1.
Oh,
you never know.
He's got a lot of books. I know that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Somebody out there knows.
Yeah.
So if you could just give me the name again too, because I don't think I'm familiar with who it is you're talking about. What historical figure?
Taliesin.
Sure. I might be pronouncing it incorrectly too, but I think it's pronounced Taliesin, and it's Taliesin.
Okay. Oh, there's somebody here looks like a typical Google search is Taliesin book. That popped up as like, and there's a book here called Taliesin by Stephen R. Lawhead.
Oh, that's it.
The Pendragon Cycle.
There you go.
Yay, that's it.
Awesome.
But that's weird that's Google popped it up as like when people search for Taliesin, this is one of the things they look for. So
maybe I'm not the only person who's been like, why can't I find this book? Because I was just going to Amazon and stuff, and I get all these other novels about him, but not that one. So
it's on. You can get the Kindle for $8.17, or the paper.
I'm gonna do that today.
Awesome. That's what we do.
Google, there's nothing you can't do.
It pays to come on the podcast.
Yeah.
We'll help you Google. And Goodreads it.
Yeah.
But it's funny, that was just reminding me, I guess one of the first, again, sort of getting into the pseudo-historical fiction books that I ever remember reading was my mom introducing me to Mary Stewart's version of the Arthurian. So the Crystal Cave, the Hollow Hills, and the Singing Sword.
I loved those books when I was a kid. I read the Crystal Cave like over and over again. Yeah.
I was under 10 for sure when I was reading those, and yeah, that's like I was already into fantasy, but it's like, oh cool, like stuff that's more our world, getting into that side and exciting me on that side. And But again, I've spoken on the show about it was in high school where I came across the ones that really got me into historical fiction more, which was the luck that on the grade 12 list of books that you could pick for ISU, Independent Study Unit, was James Clavell's Shogun. And that got me onto that side. And like me and a friend of mine, and that's why we both ended up at different times studying, like we were even getting into studying Asian languages, because we were both into languages too. So, but that's when we got into, I ended up doing one of my majors is in Asia Pacific Studies. And not Japan, but I did do China. And so
Shogun,
and Noble House. And
Shogun is a massive tome, isn't it? I seem to recall that book being in the house when I was a kid. I seem to remember trying to read it and not getting very far.
It is a big old door stopper, if I remember right. It's a big one.
Yeah. But it's good. It's really good. And then I don't know. I actually think equally enjoyed his Hong Kong related ones. So Taipan and Gaijin it's Gaijin. Yeah. Taipan, Gaijin, Noble House. Those are all in that cycle. And then I think there was Whirlwind that I never read that went to the Middle East somewhere connected to that. But he sort of came through time on the history of Hong Kong, which was then cool when I went and did a year in Hong Kong on exchange. So just sort of having some of that historical context from the beginning on that side. It's funny, like a lot of the time stuff that I really got into on the historical fiction side, I ended up studying more school-wise. Because when I read The First Man in Rome, which I've mentioned many times on the show as one of my favorites, by Colleen McCullough, which I found randomly someone had discarded it at what's it called, a cottage that we used to rent as a family, and it was just on the bedside table in the room that I was in, and so I picked it up and started reading it, and that's like a 1,000+ page book, but loved that so much, and was able to study Latin in high school at the time still, at my school, and did that all the way through, and got to learn more from that side of things. But I don't know, have you read that in the past, Libbie?
I have not read that particular one, but I've read a few others of Colleen McCullough's works. I've read The October Horse, which has a little bit more of an Egyptian-ish bent to it.
That's like the 4th in the series or so, 5th maybe.
Yeah, I picked it up because midway through, but I'm like, hey, this has Egypt stuff in it. I'll be into that, and I'll absorb the history as I go along because I already know most of that stuff anyway from nerding out on it. But yeah, it's great. She just has I should say, since she sadly died recently, but such an amazing writing style. She just was able to do it so vividly without hitting you over the head with it. She's just really, really great at historical fiction. She's awesome. Yeah. Have you guys read any of Margaret George?
I haven't.
She reminds me a lot of Colleen McCullough in many ways, and she, not the least of which, because she also writes those huge, thick, epic tomes that just take a long time to get through, and they're really meaty and chewy and fun to immerse yourself in. So yeah, I definitely would recommend her if anybody out there is looking for somebody to fill their Colleen McCullough cravings.
Cool. So yeah, I've read, I think it's the 7 in her Founders of Rome series, Colleen McCullough's. And then she wrote actually a really good one, where I enjoyed it quite a bit, Morgan's Run, which was about early Australia / New Caledonia or whatever, one of the islands off the northeast part of Australia that was one of the prison colony things, and there was the whole, I think it's where she ended up settling, the particular island that she lived on for the last 30 years of her life or whatever it was.
Huh.
And of course she's best known for Thornbirds, which is historical fiction, not as far historical, not into the ancient stuff that we're enjoying is more, but
a great book, very, very, very good, worth reading.
Yeah, I started reading it, and then I was enjoying it, but I was wanting to read some particular fantasy stuff to inform stuff I was working on, so I was like, okay, I'll shelve that for now and read it at some point. But it is really good. So.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Early Australia.
I find that a lot of the historical, stuff, and of course I haven't read as much of it as you guys have. So TV shows, for example, like The Tudors and stuff like that. Yeah. I really don't enjoy when they get really into the political, and especially the religious stuff. And so the reason I mention that is because I find that Jack White has the right sort of mix of that for me. where, especially with the William Wallace stuff, where they're talking about the role that the church played and the things that were going on, because you can't have those books without that part of it, right? Because the church played such a huge part in everything that was going on back then, and he has just the right mix where he's not hitting you over the head with it, but he is letting you know what the church was doing and how they were moving events along and things like that. So,
with that in mind, I don't know whether I should tell you that you really should read Wolf Hall or whether you should avoid it like the plague.
I'm pretty sure.
That's very political.
I'm pretty sure several people in my family have read that, and the sequel. There's a sequel.
Yeah, Bring Up the Bodies. Yeah.
Right.
Also very good.
And from what I've heard, it's probably not up my alley, but
it is like 100% politics and religion, but it's wrapped up in this lots of just really in-depth, amazing character stuff that will sort of boggle your mind as a writer and as a reader. And on top of that, some of the most delicious prose I've ever read from any writer. So it depends on what you're looking for, I guess. But yeah, if you're not ready to fully immerse yourself in like every nitpicky little detail of, you know, some stupid political conversation that happened over supper at somebody's house about a religious thing.
Yeah, and for me, I think that's the line, is to say, I don't mind if the book contains those elements, as long as it's not about those wheelings and dealings, right?
See, that's right. Say my Founders of Rome series there, like the political machinations in the Roman Republic, because this is pre-empire, right? So it was very much the operating oligarchical Senate sort of republic that they had, but that stuff is so cool. Like it's
pretty cool.
It's so well done, and then it weaves into the military side of the stuff too, and but with all these fantastically interesting characters, and she's just fantastic. I love what she does.
Yeah. Another good book that people might want to check out if they do like a story that has that combines political and religious stuff neatly with non-political religious stuff and sort of puts it into more of a character context. There is a 2-book series about Theodora, who was the Empress of Rome, or of Constantinople, sorry, not quite Rome, just before the medieval period happened, so Byzantine Empire. Very, very fascinating stuff. Stella Duffy is the author, and the first book is called Theodora, Actress, Empress, Whore, which is certainly a titillating title. It sounds kind of like a biography title, but it is a novel. It's fiction. Second book is called The Purple Shroud. So I would definitely recommend those. My personal recommendation is to listen to Theodora as an audiobook, because it's narrated by Davina Porter, who is absolutely amazing, and she does a killer job with the book, as she does with everything. I picked up the second book in the series, The Purple Shroud, because I loved the first one so much as an audiobook, and I had a little bit of a hard time getting through The Purple Shroud as written as an ebook, because the author uses some interesting choices with punctuation. I found it very difficult to wade through. So I'm hoping that Davina will show up and do the sequel too as an audiobook, because I think I'll enjoy it more that way. But really good stories.
Very cool.
Okay. Anyone else we want to?
This is like, you know, blowing my mind now, because I've been reading so much fantasy as well, right? But where I prefer to live in fantasy is on that line of the more historically, like exactly what you were talking about, Libbie. Like I tend to like secondary world stuff that is very much like our world. So like what you were saying with Song of Ice and Fire, or what? Have you read any? Because I've talked about him a few times on the show, but Guy Gabriel Kay's books.
I have, yeah. Oh God, I've read one of his books. It was several years ago. I'm trying to think of the title.
What was the setting?
Oh God, it's so hard to remember. It was very historical feeling, I will tell you that.
Because he's got I like his Chinese ones. Some people don't like them as much. There's River of Stars, and
it was not an Asian setting, I will tell you that.
Which is Kitai, is what he calls it. He basically, what he likes to do, and his quote was, he doesn't want to, or something along the lines of, he doesn't want to put words into, like, that weren't actually spoken into people's mouths. So he'd rather take the idea and the type and explore that historical theme and that historical period, but without actually having to feel like he's trotting on anyone's grave. So that's just his personal take on it.
I think that's pretty smart, and I'm trying to remember exactly.
Tigana is his one in like sort of a Renaissance Italy style.
Yep, Tigana. That's the one I read. Yeah, that was a good one. I do need to read more of his work. It's been a long time.
Yeah, I particularly liked his Chinese ones, but again, that part of that's my predilection for that side of the world. So
yeah.
So we have Quotidian Light in the comments. Hi, Maya. Saying, haha, you talking about Shogun being a doorstopper reminds me of my copy of The Tale of Genji.
yeah, that's long.
Yeah.
That is long. That's
I
like
just
the
had
great.
flashbacks to 10th grade.
That's like the great Japanese novel.
Oh yeah, and it's amazing too. I went to this very strange experimental high school that nowadays we'd probably call a charter school, but I think back then that terminology didn't really exist. We called it arts-based school, so all the curriculum was centered on the arts, which was really cool. And so we would do, a history unit on whatever period of history, and then we would have to put on this massive set of productions that would show what we'd learned from it. So for some stupid reason, when we did, Japanese history, I was like, I'm going to do stage adaptation of part of the Tale of Genji. Bad idea. It took so long. It was very difficult, and there's not a lot of content in the Tale of Genji that is appropriate for high schools. Yeah. So it was interesting, but I somehow managed to pull out a passing grade on that. So go me.
Yeah, you took on a big. They appreciated the work more than the effort more than the result.
Yeah, there was a lot of effort put forth in that school, which was nice. I also at one point adapted The Grapes of Wrath into a musical, which was probably the epic high point of my entire life. It was really awesome. Somewhat depressing musical, though.
Well, since you're mentioning some of the great historical stuff there like that, so far I've read 2.5 of the 4 great Chinese novels. So that's The Three Kingdoms, which is very military, very battle. Two leaders square off in battle, and they've got crazy names and stuff like that. But 50 million Chinese names, but really cool tactics and stuff too. Very historical. There's the Journey to the West. I haven't read yet. That's the one that's sort of the least historical because that's got the most fantastical elements of the Monkey King going to get the Buddhist texts with the priest in their journey to the West. My favorite is Outlaws of the Marsh or The Water Margin or All Men Are Brothers, depending on what translation title you want to use. But that one's fantastic. It's there's basically this huge group of outlaws that are sort of rebelling against the king, against the emperor because they're starting to be too corrupt, sort of thing. So it's very much of a Robin Hood-ish kind of a feel. But some of the ones that were there initially were actually just outlaws, and then some good people got wrapped up in it because of bad things happening to them. So it's all these interrelated, very episodic stories that keep connecting and interconnecting. And I actually played with. I want to do some serial fiction in that sort of setting at some point. And I started to for fun last year, the year before. But it's been done. It works so perfectly for it. And it's done it. That's why it's been made into TV shows again and again and again in China. But really, I don't know. I love that story. And those ones are all this is the really tiny text. This is the Journey to the West one. So it's 4 books, a lot of pages and really, really thin paper.
Right, yeah. Wow, that sounds really cool.
Yeah. And then the other one is the Dream of the Red Chamber, which is much more court drama stuff, and I didn't finish that one yet. It's not as enjoyable. But,
oh, bummer.
Yeah. But it's really long. It was a lot more like Tale of Genji, really, in terms of stuff going on.
A real commitment to read. Oh, speaking of commitments to read, I totally have a historical novel to tell you guys about. I love it. I absolutely love it, but it is... I don't think I would have been able to get through this book if I hadn't done the research I'd done for a novel I wrote about Pocahontas. So since I was used to kind of reading all these sources written in 1600s English, which is crazy and has very few standardized rules, I was able to kind of connect with this book. But it's called Argall, A-R-G-A-L-L, and it's by William T. Vollmann. And he did this series of 7 novels called The Seven Dreams, which are all about European and other cultures sort of connecting with native cultures for the first time. They're really fantastic and in-depth and fascinating. They are huge, too, like Tale of Genji thick, really thick. And this one, at least, Argall, is completely written in English from 1607 era. And it's fascinating and wonderful. He does it so perfectly. Like you can tell he just immersed himself in the historical sources because he's able to pull it off beautifully. And he'll be writing along in this very distinctive, strange, history-ish style, and talking about Pocahontas and her life and all the political issues that were surrounding the Virginia Company, etc. And then suddenly he'll just like snap into talking about how a McDonald's now stands on this exact spot. Like it sounds crazy when I talk about it, when I try to explain it to you. It's something you really have to read to experience. It is one of the most extraordinary novels I've ever read. It's amazing, but it is a serious commitment to read because you have to be willing to be like, okay, I'll totally pretend like I'm from 1607 and go along with you for 5 chapters, and then suddenly you're talking about the parkway that goes through here and all the cars on it, like still in that same weird 1607 English style. It is very dreamlike, so you can see why you call this series The Seven Dreams.
Wow.
That sounds like reading Foucault's Pendulum.
Yeah, a little bit.
Have you read Foucault's Pendulum? Not that it's historical fiction, but I did. I've read it a couple of times, but
That's another one I started when I was young and never finished.
I read that in I actually used that for my final high school year ISU, and I confused the hell out of my teacher to the point of getting a good mark. Because I didn't know what the heck I was talking about.
That's Umberto Eco, right?
Yeah, Umberto Eco is cool.
Yeah,
What was his other big?
The Name of the Rose is his.
Name of the Rose, right. That's the one they made into a movie.
Sean Connery and
Christian Slater.
Christian Slater, yeah, that's the young monk.
I remember the movie. Okay.
Young assistant.
Yeah, it's a pretty decent movie.
Yeah, and a really good book.
Yeah, very good book. The book's usually, as is typically the case with adaptations, the book is way better than the movie. But still a pretty good movie, so yeah. Oh god, what else have I been reading? Looking around trying to figure out what else is up there as far as historical fiction goes.
So Patrick, what would you want to read in historical fiction? What could we try and sell you on?
Oh yeah.
Oh geez, I don't know.
So historical fiction like The Martian, right?
Yeah, that happened, didn't it? Yeah, it's so hard to know, right? Like I typically, as a big science fiction reader, but I thrillers, mysteries, noir. I read all kinds of different genres, and it's not that I don't read some of the old-timey stuff, but based on what I've read, so I really enjoy the Arthurian legend. In fact, the book we were looking at earlier, I kind of bookmarked that one, that Taliesin.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Because that's the kind of thing I enjoy. So, and the William Wallace series, again, Jack White. So it's the the writing, and I just don't want to be beat over the head with the politics and the religion. And I would read historical fiction based on Robin Hood, or any good. I don't know. So it's hard to say what could suck me into it, because it's kind of nothing too thick, right? I don't. It's hard to say. I got at least one recommendation there with the Taliesin, so that's good.
There you go. Cool.
I have a question for you. You said you like mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about colonial American history, that sort of period?
Me and history, I prefer anything that has not happened in North America. I like to go back farther than that. So Egypt, you could get me in. Africa, let's go back further than and not anything that's happened on this continent, but before it became America, if you know what I mean.
Right. Okay. Darn. Because I did have a recommendation. That's there's a historical novel coming out next month from one of my favorite thriller authors. And I'm assuming, based on the description I read of it, that it has a little bit of a kind of a mystery or thriller aspect at its heart. And he does a great job with his, contemporary thrillers. So I'm really excited to see how his historical novel does. But that's Michael Wallace is the author,
okay.
And Crow Hollow is the title of the book. That's
I think for me it's also mostly just we grab. You're never going to read all the books you want to, and we gravitate naturally towards certain things. And if I ever, and this does happen sometimes. You get to a point where you're like, I've read nothing but science fiction for the last year. I need a palate cleanser. and that's where I'll go and read all of the Raymond Chandler and the Dashiell Hammett books as a change, so I could get into the noir. And it's so I just have to get to a point where I'm looking for something different, and then that's where I would dive into, something new for me, which would be something like historical fiction.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually find that tendency to really stick to your thing is even more prevalent among historical fiction fans. As an author, I've noticed that for sure. That like if you approach, I don't know, somebody who really only likes Tudor stuff or like European royal courts with some novel set in ancient history, they're going to be like, no, I don't read that stuff. So yeah, it's very compartmentalized, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the other side of that is very few people in the groups, like, because I've sort of poked around in the Goodreads groups and some of the historical fiction stuff, and there's a big like no fantastical elements sign on the on the door that they don't want to go in there. So like we both like that, and there's lots of people that do, but there's the people that don't, and they're keeping the door barred on those ones. So.
His Majesty's Dragon is such a cool book. Come on, people! Napoleon with dragons.
Got it.
Okay,
awesome
okay,
idea.
that sounds interesting.
That's the Naomi Novik ones.
Yeah.
I've got to read those sometime.
Yes, you got to. I've only read the first one, but it's really, really good. I mean,
what's that series called? Or the first
Temeraire. So her name's Naomi Novik, Novik.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good
so
one.
I keep meaning to, because I just think it looks like it's just got really pretty covers on them too, and
it totally has.
Okay,
covers, and it's super fun.
So you mentioned Napoleon, and
it's like Napoleon with dragons. Yeah.
But my mind immediately goes to, and this is where I'll tell you where my sort of historical fiction leanings would be, is to Time Bandits.
Oh yeah.
So.
I watched that with my son like a month or two ago.
Oh, it's such a great movie.
Yeah, good old Time Bandits.
I just have to say that it's John Cleese as Robin Hood is like the best.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that is some good stuff.
So that kind of historical fiction would be what I would be into.
I just remembered some more Roman stuff. Another, like, when I start to get back into some more historical fiction that had been written in the past, like, 10, 15 years, when I hadn't read any in a while, was Conor Gulden had been doing all his Roman stuff of the Caesar years. And then he also, I think first I'd read his Mongol series.
Hang on, sorry, I have to ask, whose kids are we listening to?
Yeah, that's mine.
Okay, I'm just curious.
They're not normally that loud.
At first it was just noise, and then it turned into a song.
It's a nice song, though.
Yeah, that's my voice.
Anyway, sorry.
But yeah, so sorry, Conor Gulden. He has like his Mongol series, so like the Rise of Genghis Khan, which is another period I've been quite interested in, which is really cool. Then he's got another series of basically the Rise of Caesar, and it was really neat seeing his completely different take on Caesar from Colleen McCullough's take on Caesar and some of the other takes on Caesar. I don't know, Colleen McCullough really gets you empathizing with whoever her main characters are in whichever book she's in. So, whereas he's not necessarily making you feel good about Caesar as often as she was, I'd say. And then the other series, completely different. They were just much shorter novels, so not the big epic stuff. But Douglas Jackson, I think he's a Scottish writer. I was tweeting with him before, but his first one is Caligula. But it's not so much about Caligula per se and trying to be really extreme there. It's about a slave who tends the animals that Caligula's bringing over for the, for all his crazy stuff that he was holding in games and stuff. And so this slave unwittingly getting brought into some of the politics and just trying to keep himself alive. So the slave's name is Rufus. So the first one is Caligula, and the second one's called Claudius. And I really enjoyed those. It was very, very different style, much more personal, set in Rome than, I've mostly read the more epic stuff. So
that sounds exactly like the type of book I'd like. I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah, it's Douglas Jackson.
Yeah, cool. Caligula. All right, I'm writing this down.
Yeah.
All right.
So we're coming up on an hour.
Because historical fiction is that awesome.
Yep.
Clearly. And I think I got a couple good recommendations out of this, including rewatching Time Bandits. So.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do that tonight.
Awesome.
So any kind of final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Historical fiction's the best.
It can really be a lot of fun. Like, I know some people would have dry sort of, if they didn't enjoy their history classes in school, well, most historical fiction is way more fun than your historical fiction, history classes at school.
Oh yeah, well, usually it's a million times more fun. And if I can get philosophical about historical fiction briefly for a moment, I think the reason people read historical fiction is the same fundamental reason why people read science fiction. I think they do it to sort of examine how we're doing currently as a society, like what direction are we heading in? Is it the right direction, the wrong direction? It kind of allows us to have a mirror where we look in and sort of do a check and see how we're doing compared to, in sci-fi it'd be how could we be doing in the future? And in historical fiction, it's how were we doing in the past and how does that stack up to where we are today? Sometimes it's a fairly grim comparison when you look at, something 2,000 years ago and you're like, oh, everyone's still exactly the same. Great.
Now, do you get a lot of in the boards or wherever in reviews people who argue the history?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get to your historical note yet. I'm curious.
Oh yeah. The greatest pastime of historical fiction fans is to go on the internet and pick apart every single historical inaccuracy in their favorite historical novels, which is fine. I mean, I do it too. I do it all the time, constantly. It's fun, but yeah, people definitely argue with the history. But I think if you like sci-fi, I think you will really like historical fiction too. It's the same basic reading experience, but you're just going backwards in time instead of forward. So, yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for coming, Libbie.
Yeah, no problem.
And if you'd like, before we close things out, if you could tell our listeners and our viewers sort of where's the best place online where they can get a hold of you and find your books.
Sure, absolutely. Best place to get a hold of me and to find my books is on my website, which is libbiehawker.com, and you spell that LIBBIEHAWKER.com. So you've got links to find all my books on there and a contact form as well.
Okay, that's great. And again, thanks so much for coming.
Sure, no problem.
And to our viewers and listeners, we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at tbrpodcast@gmail.com, and be sure to visit our Goodreads page where you can keep up with what we're reading, and the link to that is down below. And next week, hopefully, we'll have Michael back, and we do not have a topic yet, so you'll have to tune in then to find out. And we'll talk to you soon. Have a great week.
Happy reading, everyone, and go Raptors.